Hi, I'm Christopher Hine, and today we're going to be talking about more of the fundamental theory of sword work. So I'm going to cover just a few other basic concepts of sword work. These are things that often get glossed over and that no one really tells you about. And that's a weird thing to say because these things aren't like secrets, but they're also just so kind of trivial and boring in lots of ways that I think people gloss over them. And if you don't understand these trivial, boring things, you have a real hard time understanding a lot of the useful stuff that you would find in sword work. So I'm going to call Josh over here and we're going to talk about that stuff today. Josh? Okay, so let's talk about some real fundamental sword stuff, and this stuff's probably boring, but it's so boring that no one talks about it, and these things are truly essential skills, because if you don't understand these concepts, you're going to have a real hard time with swordsmanship. All right, so first I'm just going to have Josh face you and go into Chudan Ken Kamai. So this is Chudan Ken Kamai, that's middle sword position. It's middle because his sword's in the middle, and that's opposed to a Jodan or a Gaidon, right? So those are just the positions, okay? And Ken Kamai just means sword stance. So he's in Chudan Ken Kamai, which is middle position with the sword. Okay, now, what he's trying to do with this position is protect as much of his body from the sword as possible, all right? So understand that if Josh is standing perfectly centered, so right now this is kind of at ease, he's not super on guard, right? Okay, if my sword or the attacker's sword's on this side and it comes down, it's hitting in here and that goes into his body, okay? If the sword is right here and it's coming in, it's hitting his body. So when Josh truly blades his stance out, right? So there, he's truly blading his stance out now. If the sword's on this side, essentially, and understand there's a subut right here, so it can't go to his hands, his whole body is getting missed by the other sword. So that's why, and let me have it come over here and face me, that's why when we're sword to sword like this, we're hiding our bodies behind our sword, okay? Now, if his sword were to go the other side of this, I would have to move my body to the other side of this, right? Now, the reason for that is if anything's poking out right here and he's got a quick action, he can come in and get me. So what I'm trying to do is protect myself from those quick actions. So that's what the Hanumi Stance is doing. It's blading me to his action so that way I'm protected from that sword making a super quick action. This is more and more dangerous the closer we are. So meaning a lot of times when people are at the 1 foot distance, you'll see this where we can kind of be in the middle. And this is more comfortable and it's more mechanically advantageous. But as people get closer and closer with the swords, you see this starting to happen because they're blading themselves and hiding behind their sword. Now he's got to move his sword over here first. And when he does that, I have the chance to move myself to the other side as well. So understanding why stance is happening is really, really important. So this is kind of a neutral stance, right? This is a truly bladed stance, and that's where I want to keep his sword always on that side. And a lot of times I tell my students, especially my younger students, it's like a dog and a fence, right? So if we're here like this, the sword is my fence and the bad dog's over there. If the dog were to jump the fence or crawl underneath, I'm going to come over here to this other side, right? So whatever that dog does, I want to be on the opposite side of the fence because that protects me from the dog's quick actions, right? So that's the first thing to understand about Hanumi and why we stand like that is it's a bladed position where we're hiding ourselves behind the sword from his sword in case there's a quick action. Okay, now that's why we stand the way we stand. You also need to understand why we make the shots that we make. And so this is going to be in two parts. The first part is we're going to talk about high shots versus low shots, right? So I think for most people not really understanding how weapons works, they think an attack to the leg is roughly as good as attack to the body, is roughly as good as attack to the head, is roughly as good as attack to any core part of the body. And their primary attack should always be done to the core. And you know, if you took out someone's leg, well then they can't walk anymore, so that's a great thing to do, right? The problem with that is I'm always at an angular disadvantage when I go to a low target. Okay? Now the reason this is because of the arc my sword prescribes, right? So I don't know if that's the way it describes. Anyway, so the way the arc that my sword moves on. So as I move up, it will start to eventually get shorter relative to Josh, and as I move down, it will get shorter relative to Josh. Let me show you what I mean with Josh. So actually, you just hold your sword to your side. Okay, so here I am, I'm touching Josh right now, so I'm touching him. I'm not going to change me at all, Josh isn't going to change at all. Now as I drop my sword, watch what happens. I all of a sudden can't touch him. And that's because I'm making a circle basically here, right? So this part of the circle is curving away from Josh. So you see, I can't reach Josh nearly as easily. Now, in a situation where we were sword on sword, if I choose to attack his legs, I always put myself in danger. There's not a way to angle myself out of here because he's got such a reach advantage that I can't counter the reach advantage. So choosing to just randomly attack the leg is generally a bad attack. Now, there are exceptions to that, and you do see in the Aikido forums where we have leg attacks. Now, those are generally in situations where we're pushed in close, and being pushed in close is the reason that we have to make a low attack. And let me show you what I mean. So if we were really, really close, and let's say Josh's sword had flown over here, and I'm going to make my attack like this, and my posture's wrong just because I want to face the camera still while I'm doing this, but I've made my attack here, and of course I should be this way, but just to make this work out. Okay, so I'm here like this. Now, I've made my attack on Josh. I'm in the worst part of my sword to attack. So sure, it'll hurt Josh, but that's not an ideal attack. If I go here, I'm now in the sharpest part of my sword, the best part of my sword, the best part of the lever, which means I'm more likely to go through his leg here and stop him than I am here. And because of the closeness, he could hit me anyway. So I don't have to worry about like making an angular advantage or something like that because we're already too heckin' close. And so you actually see that in the forums. Now there is one other situation where this happens really dominantly in the Aikido forums, and it's in Saito Sensei's second Kumitachi, and I'm going to talk about that when we get there. I've changed it because I'm displeased with the way it came off, and I'll explain when we get to that why that is. But leg attacks in Aikido are generally only done when we're close quarters, and that's because it works out better because of the closeness of the situation. So in general, high attacks are better than low attacks because when I attack him up here, if I reach him up here, my body's farther away than his reach, and so he can't get me, right? He can't get my legs, can't get my body, and that's good. And then because we now understand how the timings work out, of course, if he leaned in, I could lean out. If he stepped in, I could step out. But we get that advantage through high line attacks versus low line attacks. So higher line attacks are better than lower line attacks because of that arc we prescribe. Now, the second part of attacking that you have to understand is that attacking the hands is almost always better than attacking the body. Now that doesn't seem like it's very sensible because it seems like, well, I want to incapacitate the other guy, so hitting him in the head or in the throat or in the core of the body or taking off his shoulder or something, that's going to be a more effective shot. The problem with that is all of those shots always endanger me more. So I'm in greater danger for doing that. So let me show you what I mean. So if I just pick a random angle, so I haven't really measured my angle out really nice here, and I attack Josh, Josh can always easily counterattack that, right? Okay, now, I could, of course, pull myself out. Now, if Josh attacks my body, he'll miss, and if Josh attacks my head, he'll miss. But Josh almost showed you what I'm going to show you right now. But if he goes for my hands, you see, he can still get my hands. He can still reach my hands. Even though I'm in position to hit him and everything else is protected but my hands are not protected. Now, that actually goes all the way back to here. Look, no chance that I'm going to hit Josh. And Josh can take out my hands. So if he chooses a clever angle where his Suba is protecting his hands and he attacks just my hands, he's going to win. Now the reason he's going to win is because it's not just like an owie. You've destroyed my ability to hold my weapon. Once you've destroyed my ability to hold my weapon, can't hold a weapon. I can't attack you with the weapon. That's great. Even if he doesn't manage to get through my hand enough to make me stop holding it, he'll get a second shot and a third shot and a fourth shot, and eventually those are going to add up. So very likely that his katana is going to go right through my fingers and take out my fingers on the first sweep because that's a fast-moving, powerful blade, and these guys are little and easy to get through. And all he's got to do really is take out these two fingers, and my ability to use my sword is going to be just about zero, even if I'm a tough guy, right? So I really, really need all 5 of these working ideally, but this one's real bad, this one's real bad. If I lose these, of course, I can't hold my sword anymore. So that's what we're looking at when we're looking at attacks is we always want to attack the most available target, and that's generally going to be the hand. So hand attacks are generally better attacks than body attacks. There's all kinds of situations where we can skew that. When we get into advanced swordsmanship, we'll talk about why those are and the little things we can play with, which are great. But in general, that's a good rule. So understand, high line attacks are better than low line attacks, and attacks to the nearest target, which is generally the hands, are the best attacks you can make, and it's because it preserves you the best in both of those situations, actually. Okay, and one more thing we need to talk about is the strength of the lever. So if Josh just holds his sword out here for me, This is a lever, right? Because it's a stick he's holding, so the way our universe works, that makes this a lever he has right now. Now, the lever has advantages and disadvantages, right? One of the advantages is that this end will move really fast now, which gives it a lot of power to cut through stuff, and that's an advantage we definitely want from this lever. But the trade-off is this has less strength than this. Now, this moves much slower, but has more strength. Now, I'm going to ask Josh to be as strong as he can. I'm going to take my pinky finger only, and I'm going to try and pull his sword offline. So resist me full force, Josh. That's my pinky finger, and he's fighting as hard as he can, and I can move that off, right? And the reason I can do that is because he's got a mechanical disadvantage. So both of his hands and his whole body working against my pinky, I can still pull this offline. He can't do nothing. Look at him, I'm wiggling my pinky. He can't stop me with that, right? And that's because he's at a mechanical disadvantage. Now, if I come down here, I'm going to do the same thing. I can only hurt my pinky, right? So I'm strong, I can make his body move, but I couldn't make his sword move, right? So I can't do it because there's a lot more strength here. The lever's stronger here than here. Now, when our swords are matched up, this is really, really important. So here, we're equal, my weak part to his weak part. Here, we're equal, my strong part to his strong part. Here, I'm winning because Josh's weak part is to my strong part. Here, Josh is winning because my weak part's to his strong part, right? If you looked into Spanish swordsmanship, like La Verdad Destreza, they break the sword up into fractions, right? So these fractions tell us how strong the comparison is. But you don't need to get into all that. Just understand that this is the weakest point. It can be moved off the line the easiest. And this is the strongest point. It can be moved off the least easily. So understanding where the strong part of the sword and the weak part of the sword is really important in swordsmanship, especially when we're talking about dueling and how you're going to defend and knock their sword out of the way and dominate the line and all this kind of stuff. So these ideas are absolutely core, and I really believe most people aren't talking that much about them. Now that HEMA's kind of around, so historical European martial arts, and there's a lot of manuscripts that kind of talk about these details, you're seeing more stuff like strong and weak is talked about quite a bit more now. Timings are talked about, things like that, but it's really important to understand these really fundamental things that, like I said, they're kind of boring. High line attacks are better than low line attacks. What does that even mean? You know, and people would argue about that, even though physically you can show quite easily how a high line attack is better than a low line attack. But you need to understand these principles if you're going to understand what swordsmanship is, and in general, just what fighting with some kind of lever with someone else is. I'm Christopher Hine. Thanks for watching.